Good morning, everyone. We are going to give people another minute or so to log on, and then we'll get started. All right, while we wait maybe another minute to admit people, just want to let everyone know that I dropped into the chat Dennis's handout. If you registered later yesterday or this morning, you did not receive the email with the handout, so I just put it in the chat as reference as well. But all right, we'll kind of continue to admit people as they show up. But good morning, everyone. My name is Michaela Kukin. I'm a member fulfillment specialist here at WiscNet. I'm joined by my colleague Ivor. I wanted to start off by saying thank you to everyone for being with us today. A few housekeeping things quick. Today's session is going to be recorded and emailed to all registrants. And we'll be leaving some time at the end for questions. So if you have any, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll answer them at the end. Otherwise, feel free to unmute and ask them in the moment as well. So at WiscNet Connections this past spring, Dennis Pauli had two sessions that were focused on leadership and communication. Many of you, along with us here at WiscNet, loved them so much that we thought it would be great to bring him into our Teach and Learn series. So with that, I'll hand things over to Dennis.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to, I guess we could say this is the Five Voices 2.0. It'll look very similar to 1.0. So if you happen to be with us in the spring, some of this may sound familiar, but I've been doing this work for 5 years with this content, and I can reassure you that there's always more to learn. And in fact, the more I learn, I sometimes realize how much more there is to learn. So who am I? I just actually 7 weeks ago retired as the superintendent of the Edgerton School District. I was there for 15 years. Prior to that, I was an elementary teacher for 6 years. I was an elementary principal for 15 years and an assistant superintendent for 4 years. So certainly have had a lot of experience in public education. But to be real honest, my love has always been teaching. If I were to pick which role of all of them did I enjoy the most, it would be back in the classroom teaching. So when I left teaching, I didn't stop teaching. I left the classroom to be a principal to make a bigger difference on more people, but I kept teaching at the graduate and the doctoral level. And so the certifications I have, that really isn't anything that I want you to be impressed by. It just simply means if there's something out there that I've experienced that's good for others, I try to get myself certified so I can actually go train and teach the content. So today we're going to focus on the 5 voices. It actually has 100% correlation with the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, if any of you have been if any of you have taken that assessment. We're going to begin by, I want you to think about your team at work. If we were in person, I could get a better sense of who the audience was in your roles, but I'm going to assume that many of you are in roles that you have contact with the administrative team, the principals, assistant principals, and what I called my cabinet, the superintendent, assistant superintendents of special education, finance, and teaching and learning. So just thinking as that as your team, on a fist of five, what I would like you to do is just rate your team. Simply, fist meaning I don't even know the names of the people on my team, and that actually could be real if you're brand new to the role. Five meaning I know my team so well, we literally can finish one another's sentences. We know that each other that well. So just fist of five, put a number up. I can't see it, but typically I'll show you what Gallup's research has found. Gallup's research has found that most teams, and this is worldwide in organizations, not just schools, but organizations all over the world. What Gallup discovered is teams tend to function at a less than 60% their overall effectiveness. So there's a lot of talent that's being left on the table. And often that talent is left on the table because of something that connects back to communication in some form. Miscommunication, misunderstanding, people looking at things completely different, even though it's a similar situation, different opinions, not understanding one another, not valuing my teammates, drama, gossip, all sorts of dynamics that can cause teams to function at less than 100%. So in the next hour, we're going to deep dive some tools that I think might be able to make a difference for you. They certainly have with the Edgerton School District. They've certainly have with many of the school districts that I've had the opportunity to work with both leadership teams, staffs, and school boards. So this is what we'll cover. We're going to cover the first one is the five voices. It's just understanding all of us are hardwired to view the world, to perceive it, and to make decisions in certain ways. And it's not something that we can change. We can learn about it and we can adjust but we're born with what we're going to talk about, a voice, a foundational voice. You're actually all five, but you're born with a foundational voice. And that's where this content can be really valuable because we begin to understand ourselves, how we can predict our tendencies in given situations. And then when we learn about other voices, we begin to learn about other people that we work with, that we live with, and realize how do people see the same similar situation very differently? Why do some people seem impulsive and like to move forward quickly and fast, while other people are very methodical? They have a lot of questions. They need a lot of detail and clarity before they're more comfortable moving forward. Then we'll also take a look at the negative impact of each of us. We all have blind spots. And so today you'll have an opportunity to have a mirror put up in front of you and take a look at what is the negative impact of each of the foundational voices. And then lastly, triggers. What causes that? What causes us to take what is so valuable and attributes about ourselves that are such a strength and actually reverse them into a negative impact? So we're going to begin by the predictability. I've said that word a couple of times already. So we're going to try an activity to see how predictable this information is. And even though we're not in person, we'll trust that I've done this enough in person that the results tend to be pretty similar. And this is just an example of how predictable the content I'm going to share with you is. First question is, what I'd like you to do is think of a number between 1 and 10. Thumbs up if you have your number. Perfect. And then multiply that number by 9. And now you'll have a new number. If your new number is 2 digits, so let's say it's 24, you add the 2 digits together. Okay, thumbs up now. You have your new number. Perfect. Now subtract 5 from that number. All right. Last thing we're going to do with that number. So you have a new number in your head. Now find the letter in the alphabet that corresponds to that number. So if your number is 1A, 2B, and so on. All right. Thumbs up if you have your letter. Okay, perfect. I want you to think of a country that begins with that letter. Okay. Visualize the spelling of your country. Take the last letter and think of an animal that begins with the last letter of your country. Great. And then the last thing we're going to do is visualize the spelling of your animal take the last letter of your animal and come up with a color. Okay. And then we'll have you put in chat a yes or no. Yes, if you were thinking about an orange kangaroo in Denmark. You might have also been thinking about an aqua koala in Denmark as well. So you can put in chat how accurate this was. It tends to be about 80% accurate. And if that's the case, that's kind of what we're going to cover today. There's no one assessment that will ever capture you 100% in your personality. Not even Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs has been around since the 60s. It's the gold standard of personality style inventories. And more than 4 million inventories are taken each year throughout the world. But even that instrument itself isn't perfect. So what we do when we try to really understand how we're hardwired is we do activities. Today is one. I will guide you to where you can actually take the 5-voice free assessment online, and it's a more in-depth version of what we're going to cover. And when I work with groups, I really like to try to triangulate to really make sure people understand this is how I'm hardwired in the terms of the 5 voices, because it's important as you're learning about yourself to make sure you're really learning about yourself and who you really are. And so we'll get into it. Here's what I found. I shared with you a slide that said, here's the different certifications I have. I've been in this leadership development space for, boy, 36 years, most of my career. And what I've been in education 39 years. And what I've discovered is people seem to think the more complex a concept is, the more effective it must be. And in fact, my experience has been the exact opposite. Simplicity is what sticks. And if something sticks, it's sustainable and people continue to use it. And then that's what begins to transform behavior and can transform a team, can transform a family. And the tools I'm going to share with you, it's scalable. I could teach this to a group of 11,000 people, or I could teach it to a group of 11. It applies to all of us, no matter what the size of the audience is. In the next 50 minutes or so, I'll talk about the difference between intentionality and accidental. Right now, I would suggest many of us we lead our lives accidentally, and we can have very successful lives. We can have very influential and impactful lives. But what I'll introduce today is the concept of, if we're intentional about some of the ways we interact with people, and even with ourselves, understanding ourselves, might we even take the influence that we have already and increase it further? And my experience has been absolutely. What drives behavior? We're really driven by 3 things: nature, nurture, choice. We're going to focus on the top one, nature. We're not going to get into nurture, choice. That could be hours and hours of workshop. We're going to focus on the nature and basically how you're hardwired, how you were born hardwired, and then we're going to attach it to these some of the voices. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have ever had an experience with something that you regret? Yeah. If anyone didn't raise their hand, bless your heart. I want to know you, because that clearly would be very intentional to lead a life of no regret. I certainly have had many regrets. And what we're going to take a look at today is what might contribute to some of that behavior. So this is a tool called Know Yourself to Lead Yourself, and it's an infinity loop, meaning we never graduate from the school of self-awareness. We never graduate from understanding why we do the things we do. But we can predict certain behaviors in given situations, meaning if this happens to me, whatever this is, I can begin to predict how I'm going to respond simply by understanding how I'm hardwired. So we're going to work this backwards real quick. Your reality today are purely, if we go clockwise, your reality today are consequences of actions you've taken to things that happen to you. So something happens to you, and you have a tendency to respond to similar incidents in the same way, those would be your actions lead you to the consequences in your reality. What we're going to unpack today is that gap between your tendency and your action. You create patterns, and those patterns are based on your hardwired, just how we're hardwired, your personality. And it's those patterns, once we begin to understand how we're hardwired, that's the predictability of the tool. And once we understand that in these given situations, I have this tendency to respond this way, if now we can begin to realize if my response created a consequence that didn't create a reality that I like, then I need to go back to when similar situations happen to me, how do I begin to create different responses? And it begins by just understanding that that dynamic is even going on inside of you. So we're going to do it through the 5 voices. So what I would like you to do is just pick up a pen and just simply sign your name. If you don't have a pen accessible to you, then pretend like you have one in your hand and go ahead and sign your name. All right. Then what I'd like you to do is I'm going to assume, I can't see you, but I'm going to assume that was pretty easy. You really didn't think about it. You've been doing it for years. This time, put the pen in your opposite hand and sign your name. As you're doing that, I can predict that it's probably a little bit clunkier. You can do it, but it's probably not as natural. It's a little bit slower, and you have to be more intentional in your thinking about it. Um, this exercise is a perfect example of the 5 voices. Some of them are very natural for you, just like you put a pen in your hand and you sign your name. You can access the attributes and the characteristics of that voice pretty much without even thinking about it. The other ones are like your opposite hand, the hand you don't normally write with. You can do it. You can access those attributes as we go through them shortly, but they're not going to be as natural, depending on the role you have, and even depending on the home were brought up in. Sometimes the very behaviors that aren't natural for us, whether it be a job that we had, you needed to have those skills to be successful, or grew up in a home that even though you might not be hardwired to have these attributes, your home environment normalized behavior that isn't necessarily how you're hardwired. So it starts to feel very normal to you. So we're going to take the 5 voices quiz. And again, this won't be perfect in the short time that we have together, but you'll get a good understanding of what we're talking about and a better understanding of how you're hardwired. When we take the quiz, we're going to really try to focus on discovering your foundational voice and how you're hardwired. We'll actually be able to discover, pretty accurately your 5 voices in the order that they fall. We'll definitely get the voice that's most like you and the voice that's least like you. But as I'm going through the characteristics and attributes of each voice, what I want you to think about is, how natural does this feel to me? How natural does this describe me? And then at the end, what I'll have you do is you're going to rate each one. We'll go through these one by one. So I know you have the packet in front of you. I'll just ask if you stay patient with me, and we'll walk through it one by one. So what you'll have in front of you at your place is the packet that is the handout, and it has bulleted attributes of each of the voices, but I'm going to give you further explanation, and then I'll actually put up a paragraph that you can read as I'm talking. And then at the end of each voice, then I'm going to ask you to assess it. How much does that feel natural to you? Is it a green? Like, wow, that feels like my default pattern. I don't really think that. I mean, most all of those really I could relate to. Or is it a red? Not at all. Can't relate at all to most of these attributes. Or is it a yellow? Somewhere in between. And if you want, you can say it was kind of an in between a green and a yellow, or you could say it's an in between a green and a red. That's kind of how we begin to say, what are your second, third, and fourth voice? But don't overthink that in the short time that we have together. All right, we're going to start with the nurturer's voice. And so the nurturers, you have the bullet points in front of you. What I'm going to put up quickly is just a paragraph you can read that will define the nurture voice, and then I'll give you some additional attributes about the nurturers. But as this slide suggests, they're champions of people, relational harmony, and value. Nurturers, I would say their superpower is empathy. They're caregivers. No one walks in the shoes of others to the extent that a nurturer does. They're just hardwired to have this intuitive sense of, if this is going to occur in a setting, nurturers more than any other voice can predict how people are going to respond to it. Nurturers are the ones who will, they'll take the time to recognize people's achievements. Nurturers often are the individuals on your team or in the family that write handwritten notes of thanks to people. And they have an unbelievable strength of building emotional connections. A couple of the challenges for the nurture can be a resistance to change. And the reason for that isn't that nurturers can't change. It's just they're so aware of how it's going to impact people in the situation, whether that be at work or at home, that they're more cautious and careful before moving into change. Nurturers also rarely value the contributions they make. More than any other voice, the nurturers in general don't see themselves nearly as effective and as awesome as the rest of the world does. So here's your question. If nurture describes you, if that feels very much like you, give it a green. If that doesn't feel at all like you, if you say, no, I'm not a nurturer at all, you could give it a red, or go ahead and assess it somewhere in between green, yellow, 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 red. All right, we're going to move on to the creative voice, and we'll do this the same way. I'll give you an overview of the creative voice. You have it in front of you, and you can take a look at those bullet points as well. But creatives, as the slide here suggests, they're champion of future ideas, innovation, and just organizational integrity. If the creatives have a superpower, I would say their superpower is innovation, vision, imagination. Your creatives are the people that are in your world, in your life, that they'll talk about things in the future that are really hard to track, really hard to even imagine. I think of AI. It was about 3 years ago when we started hearing about AI, Chat GPT, other bots. But the reality is your creatives were probably thinking this way 10 years ago. That's just a typical creative. They just see a world that doesn't exist but could exist, that a world of possibilities, and that is their superpower. Creatives, what gets in the way is they don't worry about budgets. Just if a creative thinks that this is something that is possible, they're going to figure out a way to have that become a reality. Those would be the superpowers of the creatives. A couple of challenges for creatives is, one, struggling with the fact that the creatives are the ones who they'll share stuff and not be able to understand why people on the other side of them don't fully understand what they're sharing. And the reason for that is because the creative mind is thinking at 180 miles per hour, but the creative voice to articulate what's going on in their head comes out at about 40 miles per hour, meaning we're only getting about 25% of all that brain activities that's going on. And so creatives just should be aware that you most likely aren't communicating as clearly as you think you are, especially the first time you share something. Another challenge for creatives is they tend to be perfectionists. And they often will not share their thoughts or their ideas until they feel like they've perfected it in their mind. They'll tend to, instead of focusing on the 90% of what was accomplished, they spend more time looking at the 10% that wasn't and how we could achieve that better. So creative, if creative sounds a lot like you, like, yep, that is exactly, I can relate to that. I'm hardwired very similarly. Give yourself, that would be a green. If you're not at all, like, no, I'm not creative. I don't, and again, I just want to reiterate creatives, it has nothing to do with artwork and music and writing music or any of that. It's a very different in giant terms. But if creative is not at all like you, red, and then somewhere in between. All right, then we're going to move on to the guardian voice. And the guardians, they are definite champions of due diligence, resources. They're incredibly efficient and are very process driven. Guardians will tend to have a process for everything that we're going to do within an organization or even within a home. If we're planning a trip, guardians more than other people are going to likely be the ones that map out that trip. And I've seen some guardians literally map it out to the hour of like what time we're getting up and we're getting ready, what time we're hopping in the car and leaving, and literally have the trip mapped out by the hour. Not all guardians are clearly that way, but some can be. Um, some other attributes of the Guardian, if we were to say, what is the Guardian superpower? It's detail oriented and reliable. No one is more reliable than a Guardian when we say, here's the project, the timeline, and the budget. Guardians will always come in under budget and ahead of the deadline. They're just hardwired. Guardians won't play until the work is done. If we have things to do, we're going to continue doing them. Guardians, many people make checklists, but guardians, it's a common trait of a guardian that if I complete my checklist, I just add more things to the checklist. The guardians are very driven by production, producing, productivity. The guardian voice is very much a thinking voice. Um, some of the challenges for guardians to be aware of is their strong desire for truth and making right decisions. That being the motive can sometimes come in a manner that overrides feelings of other people. So even though a guardian might be really for your idea and really for you, they may not come across that way because they may be asking questions in a manner that doesn't suggest you're for me. I've certainly experienced that in my career. And a part of that is just the second bullet under challenges is the lack of tone and tact. They can actually undermine their own influence by coming across very much driven by trying to understand the situation in a way that doesn't feel like you're for me. And guardians, like the nurture voice, guardians can be adverse to change, but for very different reasons. The guardian voice is a thinker voice. The nurture voice is a feeler voice. And because the guardian voice is a thinker voice, their resistance to change isn't based on like the nurture's awareness of how it's going to impact people. The guardian's resistant to change is really making sure that it's been well thought through, that we have budgeted for this change, that we have good rationale to be moving in this direction, and that we have thought, literally thought through all of this. So if Guardian describes you, if you're taking a look at that and thinking, yep, that a lot of those attributes are like me, give it a green. If Guardian is not at all like you, red, and then you can fill in red, green, or red, yellow, yellow, red. Okay. All right, the next voice we're going to get to is the connector voice. Connectors, these are the people who just have an incredible network of people that they know. And the connectors are the ones they can be in the room for 2 minutes and you feel like you've known a connector for a long time. Connectors will ask a lot of personal questions to get to know you. And kind of the cool thing with connectors is they really do want to get to know you. The connectors are just energized by meeting people and learning things about people. And they tend to be very persuasive and they're very strong communicators. When we would go to referendum in Edgerton, we always wanted to make sure that we had our connector personalities out in front of our audiences. But we also would like to have a guardian with them to make sure that what they're sharing is all factual and accurate and correct. Couple of other things with the guardian or the connector. If we looked at what is the connector superpower, the connector superpower is just building relationships. It's what they do so naturally. I'm a connector, but I can tell you just from personal experience, what connectors tend not to do very well is focus on detail. We're big picture, futuristic thinking individuals, and so connectors are really energized by change. But an attribute of many connectors is, we're great at coming up with ideas. We're great at starting things. We just have a problem finishing them, especially if they're things that take a longer time to really hardwire into the fabric of a system. What happens with connectors is they get bored and they're just energized by new things. You're a connector if you're kind of like, here's a great idea. You start to get it going. People are excited about it. And then you're starting to move on and finding other great ideas. If you were to find a character that might look like a connector, it'd be Tigger. Tigger just bounces around with positive energy. Connectors also seem to have a way of sharing things in a big way and enthusiastically and positive. And they're really not selling. What connectors are doing is just if they feel like something has been beneficial to them, or if they've seen it benefit others, they want to share that. So that positive energy and enthusiasm really is generally trying to connect other people to whatever the experiences that they've really enjoyed themselves. Some challenges for connectors is they do like to be recognized for making the connections. That can be energizing for them. They do have people-pleasing tendencies because the connector voice is a feeler voice, and so they do care what other people think of them, sometimes to a place where it can actually paralyze them from making decisions that they feel need to be made because they're too worried about what other people are going to think. Connectors certainly, because remember, they're sharing things that they feel passionate about and that have benefited other people. So if people start asking questions or maybe not being as accepting of the idea, connectors, it's very common to get defensive. And critical feedback can just be hard for connectors to receive. So if connector sounds like you, if you can relate to a lot of that green, if that's not at all like you, red, and then you can fill in the middle. And then we have one more voice. All right, the last voice is the pioneer. This is the voice that's the champion of strategic vision, results, problem solving. Pioneers are very competitive by nature. I think of a pioneer as if they see a hill that they want to capture, not only will they have a strategic plan on how to capture that hill, but they will also work harder than anybody else to execute their plan. They can be very persuasive but they can also be they can come across as just very dominating because they're so driven, they're so competitive. Superpower of the pioneers is just action oriented, and they're really willing, they're innovative, futuristic thinkers. So they have bold ideas and they're really not afraid to move forward on bold ideas. Pioneers, because they're a thinker voice and they're competitive and they think big, they often misread the landscape of emotions and people. And so it's not, so for many pioneers, it's not about the individuals, it's about the organization. It's about conquering a vision or an idea. And if other people benefit, that's great. But if other people are hurt by it, the pioneer more than most voices aren't going to be impacted by that because they're not focused on feelings, they're focused on outcomes and accomplishing something. Some of the challenges, the immature pioneer, and in Giant with these terms, we talk about maturity, and maturity is just simply this. It's learning more about yourself, learning more about how your voice is hardwired and the strengths of it, but also what can be challenges, what can actually be the things that undermine our own influence. And so as we learn more about ourselves and we begin to change our behavior as a result, we call that maturity. So a challenge for pioneers is an immature pioneer can often come across as very me-focused. Um, and they can quickly dismiss the contributions and ideas of other people, simply because at times for a pioneer that might feel like it's slowing down the process. We have a hill to conquer. If I ask for input from people, it's just going to slow it down how quickly we can actually go and conquer the hill. So if pioneer describes you, green. If pioneer does not at all describe you, red. And if you fall somewhere in between. All right, and then if you want to, in the chat, go ahead and just throw in what you believe right now to be your foundational voice. And what we'll see is, does your foundational voice actually match up with the general population? And just seeing so far, we have a few connectors, we have a nurture. So go ahead and keep putting in the chat what you discover to be, at this point, your foundational voice, and I'll keep going. Oops. All right, we do. So we have all five, we're all five voices, and just some are more natural to us and they're more hardwired in us than others. I have to apologize. I lost my ability to just click and move on. So one of the activities, if we had time, I would give you 100, I wouldn't give you 100 pennies, but I want you to think if you had 100 pennies. Today, we won't do it because you just don't know enough about the voices to make this. But when I work with groups, the more we've spent time really understanding the attributes, the negative impacts of each of the voices, then we actually will do an exercise where you take your 100 cents and you put it on each of the voices. Like how many pennies or how much change would you put on each voice? Because two people can have the exact same voice order, and they can have some similar predictable tendencies, but that doesn't mean that in every situation they're going to view it the same or they're going to think about it the same. So for me as a connector creative pioneer, those are the three voices that are very natural for me. Um, Neither of them really stand out as that much more dominant than the others. So I kind of put my change somewhat evenly on those. But the reality is, when the pioneer part of me comes out or the creative part of me comes out, it will always come out through my foundational connector voice. It will always come out excited, big, like Tigger, jumping around from idea to idea. But what I definitely do know about myself is I'm not a guardian. 7 cents might be an overspend on my guardian voice. The reality is, in my career as an administrator, I had to acquire guardian detail leveled skills in order to be successful in this type of a role. So I know I'm not a guardian, but I can do guardian things. What feels most natural are the creative, the pioneer, the connector type activities. A couple of assumptions to just be aware of. We're made up of all five voices. Some are more natural to us. Maturity is what allows you to value the contributions of each voice. Nature, nurture, and choice all play a part. And then the last two, kind of key, don't assume you know what someone else's foundational voice is. If you really want to know, at the very end, I'm going to give you a QR code to my website. You can go to it and take the Five Voices assessment for free. And you don't have to sign up for anything. Just you go to the link, click on it. It'll be an 80-question assessment, but then it'll give you I think it gives you your top two voices. It doesn't give you all five in order. And then the last one, don't assume you know what each word means. Giant defines these words very specifically, and they're not necessarily the definition that different societies. So Western civilization would suggest, what do you mean I'm not a foundational nurturer? That feels like a bad thing. We should all be nurturers. The reality is we all are nurturers. But the way Giant defines nurture is very different than what probably most of us think of when we think of the term nurture. So just those are some things to be cautious about. In your packet, what I'd like you to do is it's the page that has Pioneer. Just take a minute and put what did you have for your first voice and your last voice. And at a later time, we won't take time today, but you could actually fill in which ones do you think at this point might be your second, third, and fourth. But really the top one is critical, and the one that's least like you is important to be aware of, and we'll share that toward the end. Here's a breakdown of the population. These are not United States statistics. These are worldwide statistics. These statistics come from Myers-Briggs. So think of 4 million people per year taking this assessment in Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs has been around since the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, given this assessment. So that's millions and millions and tens, hundreds of millions of people that these represent. But if you take a look at the majority of people identify as nurture throughout the world. And of that, there's two voices that there's a gender difference. Nurture is one of them. Of the 43% of the nurtures, 70% tend to be women. The next voice that's most common are the guardian voices. Of the 30% of the population that's guardian, 70% tend to be men. They're the only two who there is a gender difference within them. But those two voices make up 73% of the world's population. It's important to note that they also are the two present-minded voices that move slowest into change. So it's very understandable in organizations when the leadership has a connector, creative, pioneer voice, futuristic, innovative voices, why there is confusion, why it might feel like the target keeps moving, why people don't feel like the communications is as good as it could be. And it's simply because some of those futuristic voices are energized by change, and they're changing, and they're not necessarily hardwired to do the detail things. They're not necessarily as hardwired to be concerned about the emotional fabric of the organization. And so they miss some of the critical information that needs to be communicated as we're moving forward with change. When I work with groups, teams, we just spend a lot more time on unpacking that and understanding it. This is something that's good to be aware of, each of the voices. If you look at the volume bars here, we'll start with the Pioneer. All those bars are lit up green. The connector for Guardian. If you notice that the Nurture bar, there's only one. The Nurtures tend to be the quietest voice on a team. They tend to be your quietest voice in a setting. And so if we want to get, if we really want to get the best out of everybody that's on our team, everybody that's a part of our world, it's really critical to understand why are some people quieter than others. Nurturers, the reason why nurturers tend to share their truth or withhold sharing their truth is it's often attributed to do they feel safe in a setting? Do they feel comfortable sharing their truth without being ridiculed and without being challenged to a level where it's very uncomfortable? So it's not that nurturers don't have opinions and don't have ideas, just a growth opportunity for nurturers is how do you learn to share your truth in a manner that others have an opportunity to hear it. I've facilitated many, many meetings, and I realized that often the pioneers and the connectors and the guardians were always sharing, and I would just assume that if other people didn't have anything further to add, it's just simply because they agreed. And I discovered probably about 6 years ago, that's not the case at all. I just didn't create a safe environment for some of my quieter voices to share. Creatives tend to be a little bit quieter because they wanted to try to perfect an idea before they share, and so on. Negative impact. I'm going to just open up because I haven't been following the chat box as I go through this, but I'm just going to open up the mics. Before we move into the negative impact, are there any questions about the 5 voices? and your foundational voice. Okay. I'll go relatively quickly through the negative impact. This is now what it's like to be on the other side of these voices, and typically your negative impact is a result of stress. When each voice personality type is in stressful situations, it begins to impact how other people experience you. Under moderate stress, there's subtle behavioral shifts by voice that are predictable. And under extreme stress, they're definitely more pronounced and can potentially be really hurtful to the team, the organization, or the family. So we'll go through each of the negative impacts. And then I'll also, we don't have much time today, but I'll touch upon the triggers, what activates that negative impact. And then within your packet, it's the second to last page. You also have a list of some of the triggers for each of the voices. So with the nurture voice, if you remember the nurture voice, their superpower is empathy. What happens when nurtures begin to feel like they're not being heard, when they're not appreciated, when they're being taken advantage of? What is their superpower is something they begin to withhold. So instead of giving that incredible empathy and caring to others, they actually withdraw and they withhold their care. They can come across as cold and distant and just very transactional, very short in their responses. Some of what triggers that type of behavior is feeling taken for granted, that you're not appreciated, feeling like your opinions aren't important to others in the group or the family, and people that you care about being treated unfairly, but because the nurture is a quieter voice, it's harder to express their truth in a situation. So all of those can begin to activate that feeling of wanting to withdraw the care that you have. And again, nurtures you're 43% of the population, so it's predictable. And so the goal for each of us is how do we create situations where we avoid putting individuals in those type of positions where they feel like their voice isn't important, where they feel like they're not worthy to contribute to the overall organization or at home. The creatives, if any of you are a creative voice, creatives tend to have one of two second voices. Either you're a creative connector, meaning connectors an emotional, people-oriented voice. So the creative connector tends to be a more emotional person, or the creative pioneer, and we'll get there. If you're a creative connector, remember creatives have a tendency to not be able to express what's on their mind as quickly and as clearly as they like. And because it's in an emotional voice, when creatives begin to feel moderate and extreme stress, that emotion builds up inside of them. They struggle to communicate it and articulate it. And so this is when it can just be an explosive outburst. And honestly, for me, this is actually my negative impact. It's not my foundational voice, connector. It's my second voice, the creative. Um, and I certainly have done that. And what it is it's the emotional outbursts, it's inconsistency and a lack of follow through can be a negative impact, and just ignoring practical details when we get frustrated. What triggers that in a creative connected? When values that the creative connector holds dear are being ignored by others. When people break a promise, that can be really difficult for you. The creative pioneer is a thinker voice, and they're a thinker voice because of the pioneer voice. The pioneers are thinkers, they're doers, they like to produce. And so the creative pioneer is less, they're much more subtle. What the creative pioneer will do is they don't build up an emotional outrage and then explode. Instead, what they do is they just internally create a logic piercing set of facts that will take somebody out if they're challenging the idea of a creative pioneer. And often what happens in a setting is it comes out as sharp and cynical criticism. It can be shocking and lack tact. And the rest of the people in the room may not really realize what just happened. They just know they don't want to be on the other side of that same type of a response from the creative pioneer. And the creative pioneers can set unrealistic expectations. And part of that is because you're perfectionists. What triggers that? Similar triggers to what triggers pioneers' negative impact: incompetence and inefficiency, exaggerating when other people exaggerate the truth, because remember, you're going to be a more factual driven voice, and people appearing to dismiss your ideas. Okay, the guardian. Guardians, the negative impact of a guardian is when a guardian starts to feel under moderate stress, they ask more questions quickly. And when they're in extreme stressful situations, so if a leader wants to move in a direction with change and a guardian doesn't understand why we're moving change, we just did this, that creates moderate to extreme stress. And what it looks like is the questions come out quickly, they come out very insensitively. And to be on the other side of it, it can feel like you're in an interrogation chamber, just being interrogated. It lowers team morale when people feel that way. Decision making is slower because the guardians just want every I dotted and every T crossed. Sometimes this is what people call analysis paralysis. We get so much information, or we try to get so much information, we can't even make a decision. And a moderate to extremely stressed out guardian can just start to micromanage situations. What can cause it? When they don't trust the competence of the person who has the idea or are making the decisions. When people that a guardian sees as incompetent begin to challenge their competence, and unnecessary risk taking. Because remember, the guardian is a more present-minded voice. Okay, we get to the connector. The connector's negative impact is simply their connections. It's using their connections to undermine other people, and they'll often do it in very subtle ways. Connectors, when they feel moderate to extreme stress, they sow seeds of doubt about others that have slighted them. They might do that with people on their team. It might do it with people in the family, and it's just simply making comments about others that diminishes the credibility of others and to whoever they're sharing that with. They can avoid conflict and participate in gossip, and just they can become very defensive. What activates that, what can be a trigger, is people taking credit for the connector's work. Um, when you sense that people aren't for you, and this is the dynamic with a guardian. When a guardian is asking a lot of clarifying questions, depending on how quick they come and how insensitive they come to a connector, it can feel like you're not for me at all. And people aren't willing to collaborate. And then lastly, the pioneer voice. Pioneer voice is the most intense voice. And so it can do the most damage when a pioneer is under moderate to extreme stress. What a pioneer under moderate and extreme stress is, it can very commonly do is just to simply overpower others. Often this is positional, meaning parent to child, teacher to student, administrator to teacher, and just keep going higher up. Ignoring diverse perspectives. A pioneer that's healthy and mature realizes other perspectives make their great idea even better. A pioneer that's immature and under stress ignores diverse perspectives. They miss things, and then they get frustrated when maybe their hill that they wanted to conquer is unattainable. Sometimes their behavior can undermine team unity, and the immature pioneer can be very impatient. What activates it? Pioneers get very frustrated with the incompetence of other people, people challenging theirs, very similar to guardians, and then people threatening your vision. Can be different things that activate that negative impact. But just the takeaway here is the negative impact for any of the voices is it always undermines our influence with other people, and it's a blind spot to be aware of. We're just about landing the plane, and before we do, you may not have this. I'm just going to check your packet. You may not have this in your packet, but this slide just simply shows you do have this in your packet. This slide, what it shows you is that if you look at where the nurture quadrant is, if you go to the diagonal opposite quadrant, those are the voices that think the exact opposite of you. So nurtures, you're a strong empathy feeler voice. Pioneers and the creative pioneer, they're not. They're the exact opposite. They're very much a thinker voice that's driven by accomplishing things. And then the guardian to the connector and the creative connector, same thing. Guardians very detail oriented, connectors aren't. Guardians are very present minded, connectors and the creative connectors are very future oriented. So it's just good to be aware. Often people will say that opposites attract, and I've definitely worked with many people where that is the case in their marriage. And that doesn't make it impossible. What it allows, these tools allow us to do is just begin to understand that that's why you see things so differently. Neither one of us are right or wrong, but it's incredible how you can improve the quality of relationships simply by understanding this content to a greater level. And then lastly, you have leadership insights in your packet. And that page, that at the top of that page, it says personal learning insights. It's an exercise. And just follow the directions, whichever one you feel is your foundational voice. If you're really not sure based on the last 50 minutes, just read the attributes of the different voices. And if you can connect with most of those insights, that's a good indicator that's probably your voice. So that's just an activity and exercise you can take with you. I would suggest just start with one, even though the directions say do two. I would just start with one. Build up your wins, because once you build up your wins, that's what builds excitement. So let's go back to the team performance. At the very beginning, I asked you to fist to five, assess the team you work with. Through intentionality, I suggested to you also that you can actually have greater influence. I'll share with you some results of a couple of teams. This is the Whitewater School District. The gray bar illustrates the pre-assessment that we did in October of 22. And then by being very intentional in the work that we did in Whitewater with the contents, what I shared, and there's plenty other content that we also focused on, but you can see the impact it made on the overall effectiveness of the team. They made about 20% growth in every area. And with the Edgerton School District, very similar. You can see our pre-assessment benchmark data for each year, that in this case, 2023, through intentionality, how we performed that year, and post-assessment at the end of the year. So fist to five, hold up, would these tools be beneficial to your organization? If you want to put a fist to five up or throw it in the chat box, you can put whatever number if you think that that would be beneficial to you. And if so, I'll give you my contact information. If you scan the QR code there, it'll take you to my website, and that's where you can take the 5-voice assessment for free. You can get a link to it. And with that, I will land the plane and certainly be open to taking any questions that people may have. And Michaela, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Um, Anyone who needs like I will post any handout and this QR code in my post email that goes out as well, along with the chat transcript and the recording within the next week. But if you don't worry about rushing to scan QR codes and everything like that if you don't have time. I'll send everything along in my post email. Also, our next Teach and Learn will be Wednesday, October 15th. So keep an eye out for that email. Does anyone have any last minute questions for Dennis? If not, thank you so much, Dennis, for joining our Teach and Learn.
Pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
We love having you. So definitely keep an eye out for us poking you more to be involved in WiscNet things, because we love it. The information is so valuable outside of all of the AI and tech discussions we have, leadership and communication. is so, so important. So we value any time we get to hear from you.
Super. Thank you so much. And at the beginning of the school year, all the best to everybody who's on the call today. Thank you.
All right. Have a great week, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.